Hello and welcome to my second video. My first video was on the structure of muscle spindle, and my reference is Ganong's Review of Medical Physiology. In that portion of the structure of muscle spindle, we have this scary graph. It was scary to me, and this video is for explanation of this graph. So let's just quickly revise the efferents and afferents for the muscle spindle intrafusal fibers. So efferents are of two types: the gamma motor neurons, static gamma motor neurons, and dynamic gamma motor neurons. The dynamic gamma motor neurons only innervate the dynamic nuclear bag fibers, and rest others are innervated by static gamma motor neurons, which includes this is static nuclear bag fibers and the rest nuclear chain fibers. So coming to afferents, we have afferents. These are also of two types, the 1A and 2. 1A is going to innervate all the fibers, but 2 will innervate all except this dynamic nuclear bag fiber. All except this dynamic nuclear bag fiber. So now we'll understand the graph. This is a graph. In this graph, we will study the response of 1A sensory fibers. That means response in this 1A sensory fibers to stretch alone and to stretch when we are stimulating the static gamma fibers, and when we are stimulating the dynamic gamma fibers. So let's study one by one. So we'll first concentrate on this graph and this graph. In this graph, we are seeing that stretch is increasing here. Stretch is increasing. So since it is increasing, this indicates the dynamic part of a stretch. Here stretch is dynamic. But after this point, the stretch becomes static. It's not changing. It's there, but it's not changing. So this gray area is representing the dynamic part, dynamic stretch, and after this gray area, here we are seeing the static stretch. So now we'll understand this graph. So in 1A sensory fibers, this is the dynamic response. Hence, when in the gray region, when dynamic stretch is given, this is our dynamic response. And after the dynamic stretch, when our stretch is static, comparing it from the previous portion, this will be our static state response. So we have seen the dynamic response and static state response. Now we'll compare this with the stimulation of static and dynamic fibers. So let's first study the stimulation of dynamic gamma fibers. These dynamic gamma fibers, we are studying this graph. These dynamic gamma fibers are stimulated. So we see when these dynamic gamma fibers are stimulated, there is stimulation of 1A, but since there are no efferents from this dynamic gamma dynamic nuclear back fiber, there will be no stimulation here in 2. So, and what we see in graph, there is a mild increase even before stretch. Before stretch, there is a mild increase in response to in 1A fiber, but dynamic response. We have to compare this with we have to compare this with this. So if we compare stretch alone and stretch after stimulating the dynamic gamma fiber, there is increase in dynamic response, but this static response is gonna come to original level. So there is increase in dynamic stretch, but there is no increase in static stretch. This is what we are learning from this graph. Now we'll see this graph. What this graph is showing. We are here stimulating the static gamma fiber. Static gamma motor neuron fiber is this fiber. So on stimulating, we are going to stimulate all these fibers. So in that way, the tonic activity will increase in 1A also and 2 types of fiber also. While in the previous scenario, there was no increase in activity in 2, but only 1A activity was increased. But when we are stimulating the static gamma motor fibers, there will be increase in tonic activity of both 1A and 2. On the graph, we are going to see before stretch also our 1A activity is increased, but now we on comparing with the previous graph, there is not an increase in dynamic response, but yes, steady response is increased. Steady response is increased. So here we can conclude that when we are stimulating the static gamma motor neuron, then the dynamic response will decrease, but static response will increase. And when we are stimulating the dynamic gamma motor neurons, then dynamic activity will increase, but static will have no response. So with this I end. Thank you for listening me, and if you find anything, if you couldn't understood or if you want to add anything, or if you want to correct anything, you can comment, and we can see you in another video.